Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let's just give it a couple of minutes for people to join. Anilu is based in San Francisco, and we were just chatting about how, it continues to be pretty unpredictable. How's everybody in California, Anilu?
Yeah, well, it's obviously great weather, so I'm not going to complain about that. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But with COVID, definitely things changing quite quickly, and so the full state going through a bit of an evolution and revising the protocols. So we'll see.
All right, we'll give it another few seconds, and then we'll get started. I think the biggest challenge we're going to have in our conversation is running out of time. Anilu and I have a lot of history and a lot of territory to recover.
Yeah, no, this is very exciting. It's putting back the duo together.
All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to today's conversation. I've just been so excited about the participation we've had on our previous calls. We've covered a lot of territory from leaders across a number of different spectrums. Today, I must say, as Anilu just mentioned, is sort of bringing it all full circle. I'm so excited and thrilled to have Anilu Vazquez-Ubarri join for our conversation today. I'm going to leave it to Anilu to tell her story about how she got to where she is today. But I would be really remiss not to sort of give people a sense of the amazing work and relationship that I've had the fortune to benefit from with Anilu over the years. I don't know, how many roles have we been together? You were in employee relations, you were my chief of staff, but honestly, to summarize the most important things, you were always a learner, someone who dug deep, but also stepped back to get the broader perspective. And as a leader, you're always incredible to work with because you were always willing to speak, not just on behalf of your views, but also capturing the perspective of so many. So Anilu, it's just a thrill to have this time with you. And with that, tell your story for everyone.
Thanks, Edith. Well, I owe a lot of that story to you in terms of the professional, but also the personal side. And that has really stayed with me in terms of how I like to manage my teams and interact with people. Just make sure that the professional and understanding the person are there. So thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm a recovering attorney, which is my favorite joke to tell. So that's how my professional life started. Before that, I grew up in Puerto Rico and got thrown into Princeton, and let's just establish that was different right off the bat. But it gave me a lot of perspective in terms of, just because it's different and it might be a little bit uncomfortable, it doesn't need to be something that you don't go for. But I went to Princeton, went to law school, and I was a corporate lawyer. And I really enjoyed working with my clients, but there was something that was really missing. Partly was missing that I felt like I was getting to the story, like, in the last inning, when people were already either ready to do a transaction or had made a decision. And so that kind of piqued my interest into the first role at Goldman, which was in employee relations. And that was fascinating because my timing was impeccable. I got there in 2007, and then 2008 happened. And there was a lot that happened, and it just really actually changed a lot of how I thought about the role of a corporation, leaders, and how I saw people, including yourself, be very calm and steady in a moment that was anything but. And that was my bug. And then, a couple of years later, I became your chief of staff. And that was very, a little bit out of the blue. Actually, I remember still the conversation that we were having. And I've always told people, you have to really listen carefully to what people are saying, because I didn't even know that when we were having the conversation, you were really asking if I would consider being your chief of staff.
I think a little of that is the Edith way of communicating.
Yeah.
It was understood.
Yeah, it was a bit of a roundabout, but it was based on the fact that we had spent a lot of time together actually working on some pretty complicated employee relations cases. And I think that gave us an ability to see in each other different things. Yeah, and then from there, honestly, the chief of staff role was a door opening to many things that I had never considered. And that evolved into a number of talent roles at Goldman that I thoroughly enjoyed and learned so much from, and now at TPG as the first Chief Human Resources Officer for the firm, and really enjoying the opportunity to continue to learn.
Well, it has been an incredible journey that we've had together, Anilu, and I think there's a few things that I'd like to dig into a little bit further from your describing your experience. First of all, we got to know each other working on difficult circumstances, difficult people situations. And so what advice would you give to those that are in conversations where they want to make an impression, they want to, expand their relationships and their views, to entering those circumstances and sort of getting your center of self and pushing yourself forward, although at times it could be a little bit intimidating?
I think hands down, just be yourself, because that's easy to remember. You don't have to
be yourself. It's easy to remember.
It's just easy to remember. And I think that people really can tell when you're pretending or where you're uncomfortable because the things that you really want to say are not coming out. I also think equally, and you and I have talked a lot about this, I certainly use this as a compass in terms of people that I want to spend more time on with people at work. Be a truth teller, be respectful. You can always find a way to disagree or to let people know that you're not in agreement, even if the rest of the room is in consensus. And you have to get comfortable with the fact that just because you're disagreeing doesn't mean that you're either right or people are going to agree with you. But I think that people want to know that when you tell them something, when you give them advice, it's not because of what you want to hear, it's because what you truly believe is the right thing for that person, for the institution that you're representing. And I think that's fundamental. If you can't really get to a point where you can find what that means for you, I think I would find it very difficult to have the kind of relationships that I have, with you, with anyone that I quite frankly worked with. I think people knew that I was telling them the truth.
Well, you certainly, in my experiences, in working together in the past, but seeing the types of things that you've taken on at TPG, you continue to be a truth teller and you continue to be yourself. But I do think that at times it can be hard to be yourself. You're a person of color, you're a woman, often in environments that are dominated by white men. I recall in the years we were together, we started getting this question, can you bring your true self to work? And I think I bumbled through the answer, but I remember distinctly after one of these conversations, you pulled me aside to just talk about that and why that was so important. So how do you do that? When you're feeling like you're the only one, how are you really able to just be yourself and be a truth teller?
Yeah, well, I think that you need to understand why you're the only one. Is it that if you were hired because, for example, in my case, I think at TPG, there is a need for your skill set, and it's a way to evolve the organization, including from a representation perspective. I think that you need to get comfortable being the only one or the one of few, and just what you need to do is work really, really hard so that you're not the last one. And I think that that's the mentality that has allowed me to get through a lot of those situations. At my law firm, I was in my whole department, I was the only person of color for many, many years. And then we started hiring different associates after, my arrival there. And there were other people that were very committed to it. So I think that it's okay to be the only one as long as it's momentarily and you have a plan to not be the last one. That's how I think about it. But the reality is that many of our workplaces, that's still the situation, particularly the more senior you get. And so you need to, I think, on the one hand, get mentors that are, both that look very similar to you and others that look very different. And I, as you know, I benefited from the mentorship of, your mentorship, and then, white males that look nothing like me and that think very differently. And those were equally helpful. And quite frankly, we need them to help us make the change. So it's a complicated thing, but I think that we all need to have the optimism and the drive to make sure that the network grows around us.
So in order to do these things, and I really do appreciate that you're highlighting specific actionable things that we can all as individuals keep in mind, you have to take risks and you have to put yourself out there. There are times, however, where the risks didn't turn out as you would have thought. Can you share with us an experience, Anilu, where you put yourself out there and it didn't work so well? And how did you incorporate that into your learning, rebound? How do you think about those moments?
So first of all, a lot of the risks that I took, at first I didn't want to take. They were not my idea.
Yeah, exactly.
You are responsible. In fact, I have a vivid recollection of me getting off the phone with you and being like, why is she making me do this? This is like punishment. And quite frankly, in those scenarios, I had the benefit of people like you, other mentors who basically convinced me and said, you're looking at it the wrong way. So I would say there are near and misses also that I've had. Because of the risk, evaluation. I think the risks that have not worked as well are, probably related to one, speed, not being patient enough, that things will evolve and will get better, and that you just need to go through a rocky period to get to the other side. I also think that, for me, I don't do very well with people that are not authentic and that, the intentions are not there. So you have to make an evaluation of whether your values and ultimately the environment you want to be in matches with the ultimate goal. And the job might be great, but if those are not aligned, it's difficult. And I think that I probably have less patience for that than that might have been, the right thing to do in the moment from a professional perspective.
I there's so much, of course, that resonates with what you've said. I really particularly like the fact that you've highlighted that as an individual, you get to choose. And increasingly, I believe that organizations who don't really embrace their responsibility to create a culture that's authentic and genuine are going to fall behind. And so, in order for that to happen, we have to continue to hear the voices and the desires of our people to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable. One of the things that I'm often asked now, particularly in this context of racial injustice and society coming to terms with racism, is, what do I do? What actions can I take? And one of the things that I think you and the team did an incredible job at was to ask us as leaders to pause, stop focusing on the it of diversity, i.e. simply saying we need more and it's going to take time, but rather really being thoughtful about getting under the data and connecting the initiatives that are critical to any person's success. And we ultimately ended up combining all of the functions under your leadership. So we took the talent team, we took the recruiting team and learning development, we pulled it all together to really connect the dots so that you could really implement all the things that were critically important. So the specific question is, can you share a little bit about why that was so important to get under the data, to connect all of these levers and how we saw an impact at Goldman Sachs when we worked there?
Yeah, it's definitely something, by the way, that now at TPG is also the way that we're doing things, and it really influenced me, having seen from beginning to end how data can transform a conversation that tends to be pretty emotional and hypothetical about diversity. turning it into facts. The reason why, there were two reasons why we decided to focus on that. You were actually in and around all these conversations. So one was because I was getting tired of people saying statements that they were just repeating over the years because someone else said it to them, and they were actually not true when you looked at the data. So internally, when the team and I looked at data just to inform ourselves, we already knew that those statements were not true, but they have become legend.
So for example,
yeah, like for example, women leave at a certain period of seniority because they leave to have babies. And my thing was, no, actually, turns out that they're leaving to work somewhere else. They just don't want to work for you.
Right.
So, but I understood why people had that impression, because if you were a casual observer of the organization, that could seem plausible. But when you actually kind of got beyond the top line of the numbers, you discover that there was something else. And in fact, what we needed to do was to get not only to women, to men, that were very talented too at an earlier part of their career. The second thing was because some of the data we could not figure out for a period of time, why was it that despite all the effort, and there was a lot of great effort and commitment at Goldman to increase diversity, why we were not getting to the higher levels, why at the partner and MD level we still had a gap. And it was, again, because when you looked at the data, we were starting our focus like 2 years late. And just making that change, moving our initiatives literally 2 years earlier in the career trajectory of someone made such a huge difference in terms of what the partner pipeline eventually became. And you see the results still to the last partner class, even though you and I were not there. And so I think that for me, it has always been very grounding. And you always used to tell me, you can't boil the ocean when it comes to this. And so it's also a practical tool of knowing where, out of all the fires, and there are many, where do you have to focus first and sequentially, and also where will you have more impact as a team. And you need to know your strengths and what we're in different organizations, the ability to influence outcomes may depend or may evolve. And so you should start where you can make an impact faster.
So you highlighted some of the higher level beliefs that just weren't true with respect to women. There's a question that someone's asked with respect to people of color, specifically as it relates to promotion. What were the important learnings that you've seen over your experiences?
Yeah, I think that there were phrases that also got used in terms of how people of color interact. So you have your technical side of why you get promoted. And I think that for that, people need to just be very clear that they need to demonstrate that and also make sure that other people know that they are technically capable. And those are not the same thing. So if only a limited group of people have seen your work, but the decision makers, when it comes to promotion, have not seen it, we need to, as organizations, make sure that that circle is expanded, because that's like the first bar, right? Like, are you technically prepared and functionally prepared? There's a whole other aspect of it, which is, is this person someone that can be seen as a leader? And that's where you get into a lot of subjective discussions. And again, that is partly for ourselves to work on because we're many times a little bit concerned that, we already got there, and are we overstepping by showing our leadership? And so I tell all my mentees of color, that cannot be. Right? If you have earned your spot, you need to take it and you need to use your voice. But there's a lot of it that is like put on you because there's a perception, that you will behave a certain way or not, or another way. And so I think that everyone needs to understand the whisper market on them is the first thing. And what's the whisper market on how you get promoted? And then you put those two next to each other. And then if you do your work, but if other people are not seeing it, then that's when you have to have a conversation. And I feel like that, you and I always talked about this is still true. The traffic, people in the majority, whatever the majority would be in a certain situation, have a lot more access and feel entitled to have that access. They don't feel they're imposing on you. And I feel like those conversations about promotion and, quite frankly, pay tended to happen very last minute for people of color, quite frankly, when they were like about to go. And we as organizations need to change that, but there's also a mentality that as people of color, we need to change. That is difficult because, again, you don't want to rock the boat many times, but it's you just have to know where you stand and force people to tell you where you stand.
I think that's really, really critical as a message to, people of color, and that is that, we really have to own our narrative. And I think that culturally, as Black people, we have been trained, and because of good rational history, that we have to be better, and we have to, just grind it out so that there can be no question. And I think, therefore, from a capturing the technical aspects of jobs and getting the job done, it's incredible. But we do know this is not, as you described it, the whisper market. That's really powerful. You've got to understand these other dynamics that are going on around you, and you've got to own your narrative. You have to get comfortable asking what might seem and might feel to be very uncomfortable questions.
And Edith, I think that on that, because this took me a long time to understand, it's not politics. This is not about you. I'm not telling people to play office politics. I'm just saying you need to, if you want to get promoted, you need to understand what people are saying you need to do. They need to say it to your face also. And then part of that means being in certain circles. By the way, going to certain meetings where it's going to be scary because you're going to be presenting in front of people that, are potentially more senior, but like you need to push yourself to be seen that way and to be someone that can deal with that pressure.
So we're going to take questions in probably 5 minutes. So please do start to add questions. I'll start to ask them. Let's look at this from the lens of leaders, managers, and I'm using both of those terms because I'm not just talking about the top person. I'm not just talking about Anilu, you as the top talent person in an incredibly important firm, TPG. I'm talking about even mid-level managers. We know that it's important to get that specific feedback. We know that, it's important to have environments where people are really included. What do you do and what have you done as manager to make sure that for those that are learning the skill set of advocating, et cetera, that you give them opportunities and you push them into that uncomfortable zone?
So, and again, this is something that I had to learn over the years. You managed me for a long time, so you know this. It's really hard to get, constructive feedback that will actually make you better. But if you're getting that, if someone is willing to put themselves out there, whether it's your manager, a mentor, another person who's observing you, do everything that you can to make them comfortable enough to come back another time and give you feedback, because it's so important. It's the only way that you will really progress and really start to understand a little bit of your superpowers. And it is through sometimes the things that you don't do as well, and that you can get better at. It's not that you're never going to improve, but I would say if you're a leader or a manager, you should try to create that environment. But if you're the person who's the recipient of a manager who's willing to tell you how to improve and what things you did well and not, do everything in your power to keep that manager engaged and feeling comfortable. And sometimes, to me, it was very disappointing sometimes to hear the feedback, because I wanted to make, any manager that I worked for proud, right? And so to me, I took it as a sign of letting someone down. And then I came to understand that no, that person is also not perfect. And they are doing this, they're telling me because they know that I can be better, and they know how to guide me. A little bit is feedback, a little bit is coaching, which is not a word that we use a lot when you're talking about manager relationships. And I actually, that's the view that I take. I've always told my teams, and I tell the teams at TPG, I want you, the worst meeting you have on any particular project, I want it to be with me. I'm gonna, give you a run for your money. I'm gonna ask you all the questions. You're gonna be over prepared. And then when you get to that meeting, you'll see that, you were totally ready. And that's a little bit of tough love approach. So maybe that doesn't work for everyone, but it has definitely worked for me. So I'm biased towards it. And again, to the extent that anyone that is listening has been on my teams, this probably resonates, and they probably didn't love it.
I feel a little bit of validation here, because I must admit that there were times where, in the meetings leading up to board meetings, as an example, I would go deep and I would go hard. And it was almost as though before you got through the first page, I was on it. Everything from the broader context to whether there were page numbers or not. Now, you did give me the feedback at the time, and I did think I listened, that at times it's important to, create an environment where people don't believe that you're going to jump on it right after the first 5 minutes. But I do believe that it made you, one, giving me that feedback made me a better leader, but also, that's how it works. When I go and meet with the board of Goldman Sachs, or, there's no nice, there's really like, just get right at it. And so, we just have to get comfortable with it. The real thing, though, was that I was always felt that it came from a constructive place. So when you as a leader go forth and say, okay, now I'm going to be direct and I'm going to hammer, make sure that it's in a constructive place, that it's actionable, and it's consistent. Let's move a little bit to talk about TPG. You were at an incredible firm. You decided that it was time for the next chapter. Why TPG? And what is it about that environment that drew you there? And now that you're there, what's the real deal about the environment?
Yeah, it was an opportunity that, quite frankly, came up pretty unexpectedly, even though I had known a little bit about them through our work with them. They're a client of Goldman, and so I had some interactions with them. But I think what really attracted me to the opportunity was, one, that they were being very self-aware about where they have gone as an organization, and they knew where they needed to go, and they were just kind of grabbing the different toolkits and things that they would need to get there as an organization. But they already had a vision with respect to people. They have a culture that is extremely positive, and quite frankly is the reason why I think that they have accomplished so much, both on the commercial side and in terms of how people feel about the firm, before even having some.
A minute on TPG and the business of TPG, I think, for those who might not know.
Yeah, so TPG Global is a private equity firm. It's an alternatives firm, and we have about 900 employees, and then we manage a portfolio across the buyout side, growth, social impact, real estate, international, and many other product lines that has over 200 portfolio companies in it, and they're very different companies. So that's the other thing that was really fun about this opportunity, that while the majority of my role is internally focused, and believe me, we have a lot to do internally, that there is this constant relationship in with our ecosystem, with our investors on the limited partner side, with the portfolio companies, and then with the people at TPG. And so I felt, Edith, that while the business actually was very different, and how people do their job there is very different than the day-to-day at Goldman in many ways, the drive, the teamwork was very similar to me, and it resonated. And then the other thing is, again, they were very open with me. They told me the things in the interviews. I remember everyone that I interviewed with saying, these are the things that we think we do really well, and these are the things that we think we need to improve. And, one of them, which again, like, just immediately caught my attention, was they said, we are not very good at giving people candid and direct and timely feedback. And their view of it was that because, they grew up, quite frankly, as a very small firm for many years that has grown exponentially, they're like, we care for each other. We work so closely together. They're like, these people travel all the time, right, in teams. So they took it as we don't want to offend anyone. We want, to preserve our family unit kind of thing. And realizing on their own that was not going to work anymore, and that's not what people wanted. So, it's been a fascinating change. It involved moving, a family of 6, because my parents moved from one coast to the other. So that's a whole nother thing. But I think that's actually a very important point, because you and I were talking about what questions people ask me all the time. And one question that I get particularly from people of color is, why did you take that risk, right, to move your whole family?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, one, I always remember a conversation, this very great advice that you and I had, where you told me, think about the places that you and Marcos may want to move together if there was a good opportunity. And I remember you telling me that you thought about that, and then you got the opportunity to move to London, and how you and Robert had already kind of talked about what that would look like if something came up. And I think it's really good practical advice. I think that people should, with their significant others, whomever is important in their lives, have a bit of a plan in case something good comes up. So we had put the Bay Area on that list, but it was a process of, why not? This is something that at a minimum will be a growth opportunity for all of us as a family. And there are very few opportunities that you get like that.
Yeah, there are 3. Gosh, I knew we weren't going to have enough time, but let me just put 3 things out there, and you can take them in any order that you'd like. This is an incredibly challenging time for America and for the world. Unemployment is at a level that we haven't seen since the Depression, and so there are a lot of people who are either currently in jobs who feel like they should be looking for something else but don't, because it's such a difficult environment, and then there's others that are going to be looking for opportunities because they've been displaced. How do you still own your narrative and forge ahead when some of these obstacles can be pretty significant? So that's sort of the first question. The second one has to do with power and the control of capital, and how that's so important. So who has the capital to invest in companies, whether it's in the lending platforms of banks or other organizations, venture capital, private equity, capital flows that were traditionally and still are very much controlled and controlled by the majority, but also limited to people of color. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit as well?
Yeah. So on the first question, I would say this is an incredibly challenging time. I mean, it's also because the whole world is going at it at the same time. If you think about other crises, portions of the world have been impacted, but not everyone. And so the reality is that for people right now who are finding themselves in a situation where either they already don't have the job because their companies have had to make some very tough decisions, or are anticipating that given where this is going, your job is not going to be as interesting or as, that it could be dispensable. I think that the most important thing is to organize yourself and to really look at the situation almost in a clinical way, which I know it's a hard thing, but this is the time for you to work on your resume, really look at it in terms of what are your applicable skills as opposed to job, and also to activate your network. And so I definitely recommend for people to be diligent and contact people that really know you. Don't go and send random, LinkedIn messages to people that don't know you, but be selective, because people will help. If you, all of us understand that these situations are brought on not by anyone's fault. And that everyone needs a career transition and a hand. So I would say get organized, and also spot where there might be opportunities, right? The market is moving in very interesting ways in terms of what's gonna be long lasting, And so I think that when I look at it, even for our own portfolio, we're big in healthcare, for example, which was always an interesting field, but now it's different parts of the healthcare sector are gonna get activated. So just get creative also about how to think about your next opportunity. With respect to capital, I think that has been an important question that now everyone will have to answer. And so not dissimilar to the discussions on race, where it was important already. It's just that some people, some organizations felt that they didn't need to participate in the conversation. Those are very different things. So I think that there will be a demand, both from investors and, quite frankly, people joining organizations. This will become part of what people want to know. What is TPG doing, for example, to make sure that we allocate capital in a way that goes beyond the regular circles. And so we have been thinking about this question for some time. Actually, as I joined the firm, one of the things that was said to me in the interview was that they had started this project to look at how we could contribute to the industry more broadly in terms of people of color and women, and people also, diverse managers who were of a different sexual orientation, which is something that the industry doesn't talk about a lot. So I think, Edith, that it's going to be a combination of firms having efforts that are inclusive of looking at people of color and women and LGBTQ diverse managers, as well as in the overall investments, asking for those questions in terms of how that capital gets deployed more broadly beyond what we invest in, which is also a question that doesn't get discussed a lot. There's like a market after a market.
Yeah.
And so if you ask the questions as part of your diligence, for example, for some of these companies, that also will drive a change in terms of what they think about for their own decisions.
So the suggestions that you might have for folks who are listening, who are in business startup mode, have had challenges getting access to capital, at the seed level. What advice would you have for those folks?
Very similar to the career advice. Understand how these decisions get made and who makes them, and find your way to that person, as opposed to starting at the kind of lower level. Figure out what the full process of the decision is, and try to use your network and ask to speak to people who are making those decisions every day, because you'll find that each organization will have a bit of a different framework depending on what their strategy is and what the fund structure may be. So I think educating yourself, but navigating yourself to the right circles. And the thing is that we can do it, actually, Edith. When you think about, if you really think about who you know that knows someone else, that's the phone call that you need to make. And I feel like we don't do that often. I know I haven't done it. I've given you, a little bit of a hard time and written about it too. But you have to go and get to those people, because other people are doing it.
Yeah, and I think that, Anilu, you've pointed out something that's really important, is that, we all have to do it. And, I've been at this for a very long time, but even I need sometimes to just have a push to really not just think about the person that I know directly, but the relationship that they have. And when you live you spend your career, in a value-led way, people really do want to help, and people are eager to share their knowledge. One of the things, again, any questions, we'll look forward to them, but we're picking up on everything that people have asked. You've mentioned in so many different contexts the importance of leveraging your community. Earlier, you mentioned that, whether you call a manager or a coach, that's something that really resonates with me, as because you've been very helpful in helping us think about Medley. Medley is a business that we're launching, that I'm launching with my daughter, Jordan Taylor, that's really centered around the power of interacting with others to gain perspective. No longer can you really just tackle the professional without the personal, but you have to bring them together. And a coach is an incredibly valuable asset to have in doing so. Some of the knowledge that I got and the significance of coaching through the work that we did in terms of bringing groups together. How should we think about how important it is to get those broader perspectives? You touched on it a little bit before, but can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I've told you, I think that Medley is a very important platform, and it couldn't be more relevant where we are today, and quite frankly, where I think we're going to stay, because I think that some of the things that have happened as part of the very unfortunate global pandemic is that hopefully we'll retain some of the good things that have come about. And community is definitely one of them. I think that we've all discovered that it turns out we like other humans a lot, and that brings us a lot of energy. And so I'll tell you, I think that the key to the community building is have it be a little bit dimensional, in the sense that you're not just talking to people that do the same thing that you do or the way that you do it. So that can be from different industries, as we have talked, that can be people in different stages of their career, where you're talking about one particular topic, but you see how different people problem solve for it, and it gives you different frameworks. Certainly it is about people from different races, ethnicities, sexual orientation, and backgrounds, right? We talked a lot about at Goldman about people who were first generation college students, and that was really something that it really gave me a very good insight about, like, what the difference of the same experience, which is college, right? It truly gets marked by things that have really nothing to do with you. It has to do with your family and how you respond to that. So I think that Medley will be a solution for people that need community, that need the coaching, that need the reinforcement. But I think people will also gain a lot from it, because when you're coaching others and when you're sharing your experiences, you learn a lot too. And I would say, at TPG, we, in the last, 3.5 weeks, we did over 30 roundtables with employees to discuss race, racial injustice, and what we could do or not. And we had over 300 people participate in the roundtables. They were facilitated by partners of the firm and by members of our affinity groups. And these were across the firm globally. And the number one piece of feedback in the themes had nothing to do with race or racial injustice. It had to do with the sense of community and closeness, that discussing a topic that difficult and that uncomfortable, how people just feel very differently about their colleagues as a result. So I think that in that sense, Medley will fill a need.
So thank you for that. And everyone should know that we're launching Medley next week. And so check it out on withmedley.com. Let's just full circle. We talked about the importance of bringing together personal and professional. And you certainly are doing that. You have 2 wonderful sons, and Marcos, and you mentioned your parents moved out to the West Coast. Let's just talk just for the final, minute about how you figured it out. I don't think it's about balance. I think it's about a blended life. Tell us about your experiences and suggestions that you might make.
I think that the key is that I overshare. So everyone in my team knows my kids. They know about my parents. They know about Marcos. They know we're going to write a book that is like how to move 6 Puerto Ricans without losing one of them across the country. And it's a little bit of its humor, right? Like, it is a little bit chaotic. It's not perfect to other people, but it's perfect to me. And, I think that honestly, why would you work as hard as we do if it wasn't for the enjoyment of your family and the legacy that you're building. So they give me, first of all, they give me a lot of feedback. So it's been built in, and they don't take me that seriously. They understand, they know I'm in meetings, and so it has never been a thing that is separate for my kids also. They know I do meetings. Now they know that, like, you used to travel a lot, now you're not in planes. So we're all, quite frankly, kind of like, we're lucking out that, like, through all of this, we get to spend more time together. So I just talk about them, and they're just part of what I do and how I do it.
You have always been a role model for someone who brings their true self to work. It has really been a pleasure to take our never-ending conversations to a more broader universe. It's been very important for us to highlight excellence across a number of different places, and you are clearly that. You've built your career on a variety of different experiences. You rose to partner at TPG in I don't know, world record time probably, and you've remained a human being and a mentor throughout. So thanks so much, Anilu, for spending time with all of us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Edith. It's been great to see you, and I hope that you and the family are safe.
Same with yours. Bye-bye.